Now, to continue on in the 1920s, the conflict of cultures, I had mentioned before that this was really a time of an early push for equal rights, particularly for Black Americans in the 1920s. There was an organization called the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It was founded in 1909, and it was as a response to lynching of Black Americans across the United States. Now, lynching, if you're not familiar with that, it's a practice of hanging someone from a pole or a tree. Sometimes this was done without the benefit of a trial. There was no trial, and it was done outside the proper protection of the law. So it wasn't like somebody uh, went to jail, got arrested, had a trial, and then this was the punishment handed down by the judge. No, this was extra legal means. People might just round up a black person and then go hang him from a tree. The overwhelming victims of lynching were black males, and they lived in the South. The NAACP also recognized the importance of citizens being able to vote. If, like I'd mentioned before, if a group of people cannot vote, they cannot expect politicians to pass laws that will protect their rights and make their lives easier. So if you don't have the right to vote, politicians won't pay attention to you. Therefore, nothing will get done for you. So you absolutely need the right to vote. Now, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about lynching because the NAACP, they were founded for two reasons. One, to stop lynching, and also two, to try to encourage greater voting rights, but primarily to stop lynching. Now, lynching, it is primarily was done to black males. There were some examples of black females, but primarily to black males. It became more common in the South following the Civil War and Reconstruction in the southern states. There was black towns and black parts of cities that had emerged as black slaves as they leave, black ex-slaves, as they leave the plantations and they want to find their own places to live, they begin to settle in either certain towns that are primarily black or predominantly black, or certain parts of towns that are going to be predominantly black. And many Southern whites, they were concerned about the growing pushback by black Americans to become members of Southern society. They weren't slaves anymore, and they wanted to be mainstreamed and be part of society, and the white Southerners were intimidated and upset by that. Now, lynching, I'd said many times, this is done without the permission of law enforcement. Sometimes, though, law enforcement would just allow it to happen. For those blacks who were deemed uppity or too pushy or trying to vote, lynching would be a practice that would remind the rest of the black community what would happen if they pushed too hard. It was intended to intimidate the rest of the black community. A lot of this happened during the late 19th century and early 20th century, and on average there was 2 to 3 blacks who were lynched every single week during that time period. Now, one of the more grotesque things about this, and I've included these pictures because they're not just photographs. These were photographs that were then turned into postcards. These postcards were made of the lynchings, and then they were sold in drugstores where you could readily buy them. And surprisingly enough, as a postcard, you could actually put a stamp on this and send it to the mail, or send it through the mail to a family member or somebody else. As they became popular to send in mail, the federal government eventually made it illegal to use them as a postcard, and then they became collector items for some people. It's really interesting from these. It's common to see white males, but also to see females, young men, and even little girls who posed for these pictures. There was no shame in this. There was no concern that they would be in trouble for this murder, for this act. It wasn't at all. It was something, like I said, it was intended to be an act of intimidation for the rest of the black community. Look what happens if you try to establish your rights and try to become part of mainstream society. The NAACP, like I mentioned, they were formed to push the local, state, and eventually the federal governments to pass laws to make lynching illegal, and also, most importantly, to prosecute those who have participated. So that's the start of the NAACP. It is because of something that we call lynching.